Hi, I'm David Adams, the Chief Executive Officer of the Urban Assembly, on behalf of the LA County Office of Education. I'm here today to talk about social and emotional learning and equity. To do so, I'm going to bring us back to my college days. I'm at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and like most college students, I'm what they call financially constrained. Well, a good friend of mine invites me to his birthday party. I take my seat at the table, open up the menu, and I come to a quick realization that perhaps not everyone was as financially constrained as I was. Well, I'm a problem solver, and this isn't my first rodeo, so I stick to my mainstays in situations like this: soup and water. And all was good in the land until the bill. Well, now we have a good old Texas standoff. What are we willing to do to maintain community while pursuing fairness? Option 1, everything gets split down the middle. But me and my soup are not a fan of this option, given that others were much more liberal in their ordering. Option 2, everyone pays their own bill. Sure, we may have some arguments around how many dumplings each person's had from the appetizers, but this generally solves my problem. Option 3, the birthday boy pays, because who brings college students to an expensive restaurant? Before we get to how we address this problem, let's talk about some of the prerequisites of the question. What is community? Well, community reflects the shared values and identities and networks that bond people to each other through a commitment of reciprocity and the willingness of individuals to act through the common interest. The fact that we had bonds helped motivate us to pursue an outcome that we, the people in our group, could get behind. We had a common interest of not looking petty in front of the waitress and maintaining our friendship. This notion of community is so important when talking about the common good. Perceptions of community drive our willingness to pursue a common interest. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. But unlike our group of friends, our country has struggled to define the we. In her book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together, Heather McGhee speaks to this notion of community, writing, "The civil rights movement, which widened the circle of public beneficiaries and could have heralded a more moral, prosperous nation, wound up diminishing white people's commitment to the very idea of public goods. In the late 1950s, over 2/3 of white Americans agreed with the now radical idea that government ought to guarantee a job for anyone who wants one and ensure a minimum standard of living for everyone in the country. White support for these ideas nosedived from around 70% to 35% from 1960 to 1964 and has remained low ever since." Her central metaphor is that of towns and cities that closed their public pools rather than share them with Black people, leaving everyone who couldn't afford a private pool materially worse off. 2 generations ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. echoed similar themes as he completed his last march to Selma in 1965. He wrote that the Southern aristocracy took the world and gave the poor white man Jim Crow. He gave him Jim Crow, and when his wrinkled stomach cried out for the food that his empty pockets could not provide, he ate Jim Crow, a psychological bird that told him no matter how bad off he was, at least he was a white man better than the Black man. And he ate Jim Crow. And when his undernourished children cried out for the necessities that his low wages could not provide, he showed them the Jim Crow signs on the buses and in the stores and on the streets and in the public buildings, and his children too learned to feed upon Jim Crow, their last outpost of psychological oblivion. And so we return to this question of the common good, equity, and how we will pursue it, as well as the role social and emotional competencies play in this pursuit. In sum, social and emotional learning focuses on how we relate to ourselves and others in the pursuit of problem solving. And what greater problem can we solve than living together in a community of justice? Social awareness. Students demonstrate an awareness of the role and value of others in the greater community. Adults around me show me how to care for others and how to contribute to bettering our community through their actions and opportunities they provide me. We work through this concept with our students at the Urban Assembly through the establishment of a social contract, where students talk about how they will treat each other and how to make amends when those norms are broken. Inevitably, when we have this discussion with our students, the question comes up, who is in our community? Our classroom? Our advisories? Our school? The answer, as with most things in life, is left up to our young people to navigate, just as we've been navigating this question as a country for 250 years. Who is our community? What is our relationship to each other? Relationship skills. Students develop constructive relationships. Adults around me show me what constructive relationships look, sound, and feel like through their actions and words. I spend a lot of time thinking about the difference between constructive and destructive, to build versus destroy. If you look up the word union, the definition will read a state of being united, a combination, as a result of joining two or more things into one. A more perfect union. What kind of union do we want to be in? What kind of relationships will our communities develop with each other? Constructive? Ones that build, that create, that result in a more perfect union? Or destructive ones that substitute grievance for governance? What are our adults showing our young people? What do we believe we're capable of? There are people who don't believe a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy is feasible, that a nation who put a man on the moon and won 2 world wars is capable of resolving these differences peacefully. I disagree. But we can't see each other as enemies bound to replicate our oppression through some karmic dance. We need to envision a, quote, society of justice where none would prey upon the weakness of others. A society of brotherhood where every man would respect the dignity and worth of human personality, end quote. That's a society that's better for everyone. That's a society that reflects a more perfect union. So how do we get there? Well, first, kids need a social and emotional education so that they are no longer content to be fed that psychological bird of resentment and return to the charge from our founding fathers to form a more perfect union. Our schools must reflect the values we seek to develop in our youth: personal and social responsibility, perspective taking, community, constructive discourse. These are American values. These are social and emotional skills. Next, we need to raise the purpose of our public schools beyond math and science factories. We must acknowledge that our social engineers contribute as much to our communities as their more mathematically minded counterparts. For what use is a sturdy bridge if the society around it crumbles? In the words of Neil Postman, public education does not serve a public, it creates a public. And in creating the right kind of public, the schools contributed towards strengthening the spiritual basis of the American creed. That is how Jefferson understood it. That is how Horace Mann understood it, and how John Dewey understood it. And in fact, there is no other way to understand it. The question is not, does or doesn't public schooling create a public? The question is, what kind of public does it create? A conglomerate of self-indulgent consumers, angry, soulless, directionless masses, indifferent, confused citizens? Or a public imbued with confidence, a sense of purpose, of respect for learning and tolerance? The answer to this question has nothing whatsoever to do with computers, with testing, with teacher accountability, with class size, and the other details of managing schools. The right answer depends on 2 things, and 2 things alone: the existence of shared narratives and the capacity of such narratives to provide an inspired reason for schooling. Who we are is just as important as what we know. I know I never finished the story about that meal way back when, and I confess, I don't actually remember how we resolved that problem. I do know that we are all still friends to this day, and if a group of college students can pursue the common good, then our nation can